I entered the restaurant at 8:30 p.m., drawn in by its refined atmosphere. I sat, waiting for my brother, unaware of what lay ahead. Glances and silence filled the tense air. Then danger struck, sudden and life-changing. The city lights of New York twinkled like a sea of stars as I gazed out the window of my penthouse apartment. It was a view I'd seen countless times, yet it never failed to take my breath away. I, Olivia Prescott, heiress to Prescott Pharmaceuticals, had everything a woman could want: wealth, status, and a future set in stone. But on this particular evening, as I prepared for a dinner that would change my life forever, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I smoothed down the fabric of my designer gown, a shimmering creation that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. The weight of the Prescott legacy hung heavy on my shoulders, a constant reminder of the expectations placed upon me. At 35, I was poised to take over the company from my father, a transition that had been in the works for years. Tonight's dinner at the Golden Pearl, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, was meant to be a celebration of sorts, a final hurrah before I fully stepped into my role as CEO. As I applied a final touch of lipstick, my phone buzzed with a message from my brother, Alexander. "Running late. Traffic's a nightmare. Order me a scotch?" I sighed, unsurprised by his tardiness. Alex had always been the free spirit of the family, more interested in enjoying life than shouldering responsibilities. While I had been groomed from birth to lead Prescott Pharmaceuticals, Alex had been allowed to chart his own course. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy at his freedom, even as I worried about his lack of direction. The elevator ride down to the lobby was a solitary affair, giving me time to reflect on the journey that had brought me to this point. Years of rigorous education, countless internships, and an unwavering focus on the family business had consumed my life. I'd sacrificed personal relationships and simple pleasures in pursuit of the Prescott dream. As the elevator doors opened, I pushed aside my doubts. Tonight was about celebration, not introspection. The moment I stepped out of my building, I was enveloped by the vibrant energy of New York City. The cacophony of honking horns, chattering pedestrians, and distant sirens created a familiar urban symphony. My driver, James, was waiting with the car door open. "Good evening, Miss Prescott," he said with a warm smile. "To the Golden Pearl?" I nodded, settling into the plush leather seat. As we wove through the bustling streets, I found myself studying the faces we passed. Businessmen hurrying home, tourists marveling at the skyscrapers, street vendors packing up for the night. Each person had their own story, their own dreams and struggles. For a moment, I wondered what it would be like to be one of them, free from the weight of a pharmaceutical empire. The Golden Pearl lived up to its name, a gleaming jewel nestled in the heart of Manhattan. As I stepped out of the car, the maitre d' rushed to greet me. "Miss Prescott, welcome. Your table is ready, and your brother called to say he'll be here shortly." I followed him through the restaurant, acutely aware of the eyes that followed me. The Prescott name carried weight, and in circles like these, it was both a blessing and a curse. Whispers trailed in my wake, speculation about the company's future, gossip about my personal life, and the ever-present rumors about the true nature of my sudden ascension to power. My table, as always, was in a prime location with a stunning view of the city skyline. I ordered a glass of champagne and Alex's scotch, settling in to wait. The bubbles danced on my tongue, a small pleasure in an evening fraught with unspoken tension. As the minutes ticked by, I found my gaze drawn to a commotion near the restaurant's entrance. A disheveled man, clearly out of place in the upscale establishment, was arguing with the staff. There was something vaguely familiar about him, but I couldn't quite place it. Before I could give it more thought, Alex's arrival diverted my attention. "Liv!" he exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that smelled of expensive cologne and a hint of cigarette smoke. "Sorry I'm late. You look stunning, as always." I returned his embrace, noting the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his scotch. "Everything okay, Alex? You seem on edge." He waved off my concern with a forced laugh. "Just the usual pre-dinner jitters. You know how these fancy places make me feel like a bull in a china shop." As we settled into our seats, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his unease than he was letting on. But years of etiquette training kicked in, and I steered the conversation to safer topics, reminiscing about childhood summers at our family's Hampton estate, discussing the latest industry gossip, anything to avoid the elephant in the room. Tomorrow's board meeting, where I would officially be named CEO. Our appetizers arrived, a delicate arrangement of seared scallops for me, foie gras for Alex. As I raised my fork to take a bite, a strange sensation washed over me. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and I felt a tightness in my chest that I initially attributed to anxiety. "Liv?" Alex's voice sounded distant. "Are you all right? You look pale." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. The tightness in my chest had morphed into a burning sensation, and I suddenly found it difficult to breathe. Panic set in as I realized what was happening. An allergic reaction. But to what? I'd been so careful, always vigilant about my severe allergies. The room erupted into chaos. Alex was shouting for help. Waiters were rushing to our table. And through the haze of my fading consciousness, I saw the disheveled man from earlier pushing his way through the crowd. As darkness began to creep in at the edges of my vision, I heard a gravelly voice cut through the panic. "I'm a doctor. Let me through." The last thing I saw before the world went black was a pair of intense, familiar eyes. Eyes that held a lifetime of pain, wisdom, and an unexpected glimmer of hope. In that moment, suspended between life and death, I had no idea that this was just the beginning. The carefully constructed world I'd known was about to shatter, revealing secrets that would shake the very foundation of everything I believed to be true. The world came back to me in fragments. The steady beep of a heart monitor, the antiseptic smell of a hospital room, and the dull ache in my throat. I blinked, trying to focus on my surroundings. The stark white walls and medical equipment confirmed my suspicions. I was in a hospital bed. "Welcome back, Ms. Prescott," a gentle voice said. I turned to see a nurse adjusting my IV. "You gave everyone quite a scare." Memories flooded back. The dinner, the sudden inability to breathe, the chaos that followed. I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw and constricted. The nurse quickly brought me a cup of water with a straw. "Easy now," she cautioned as I sipped. "The doctor will be here shortly to explain everything." As if on cue, the door opened and a familiar face entered. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, our family physician for years. Her presence was comforting, a link to normality in this surreal situation. "Olivia," she said, her tone a mix of relief and concern. "How are you feeling?" I managed a weak smile. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I croaked. "What happened?" Dr. Rodriguez pulled up a chair beside my bed. "You had a severe allergic reaction at the restaurant. If it weren't for quick action, we might be having a very different conversation right now." The gravity of her words sank in. I had come close to... I couldn't even bring myself to think it. "But I was so careful," I protested. "I always am." Dr. Rodriguez nodded sympathetically. "We're still running tests to determine the exact cause. But Olivia, there's something else you need to know." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The initial tests showed traces of a substance that, well, it shouldn't have been in your system." My mind raced, trying to process what she was implying. "Are you saying I was poisoned?" The doctor's hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. The room seemed to spin as the implications set in. Who would want to harm me? And why? Before I could voice these questions, the door burst open, and Alex rushed in, his face a mask of worry and guilt. "Liv, thank God you're awake," he exclaimed, pulling me into a gentle hug. "I've been going out of my mind with worry." As he pulled back, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes and the rumpled state of his clothes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "How long was I out?" I asked, looking between Alex and Dr. Rodriguez. 3 days, Alex answered, his voice cracking. "They weren't sure if... it was touch and go for a while." Dr. Rodriguez cleared her throat. "Olivia needs rest," she said firmly. "We can discuss details later." Alex nodded, squeezing my hand. "Of course. I'll be right outside if you need anything, sis." As they left, I was left alone with my thoughts, which were anything but restful. Someone had tried to harm me, possibly even kill me. The question was, who? And why now, on the eve of my ascension to CEO? My musings were interrupted by a soft knock on the door, expecting Alex or Dr. Rodriguez. I was surprised to see a face I didn't recognize. A woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and an air of authority. "Miss Prescott," she said, flashing a badge. "I'm Detective Sarah Chen. I was hoping we could talk about what happened at the Golden Pearl." I nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. As she settled in, I couldn't help but notice the way her eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. "I understand this is a difficult time," Detective Chen began, "but anything you can remember about that night could be crucial." I recounted the events leading up to my allergic reaction, trying to recall every detail. As I spoke, a memory surfaced. The disheveled man I'd noticed at the restaurant entrance. "There was a man," I said, my brow furrowing. "He seemed out of place, arguing with the staff, and then, when it was happening, I think I saw him again. He said he was a doctor." Detective Chen leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Can you describe him?" I closed my eyes, trying to conjure a clearer image. Older, maybe in his 60s. Gray hair, beard. Clothes were worn, but his eyes, they were intense. Familiar somehow. The detective made notes, her pen scratching against her notepad. "Ms. Prescott, I need to ask, do you know of anyone who might want to harm you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. I thought of business rivals, disgruntled employees, even radical groups opposed to the pharmaceutical industry. But none of it felt right. I don't know," I admitted. "Our company has competitors, of course. But to go this far?" Detective Chen nodded sympathetically. "We're exploring all angles. The man you mentioned, he performed an emergency tracheotomy that saved your life. But he disappeared before we could question him thoroughly." My hand instinctively went to my throat, feeling the bandage there. A stranger had saved my life with an impromptu surgical procedure in a restaurant. The absurdity of it all was almost too much to bear. "There's one more thing," Detective Chen added, her tone careful. "We found traces of a rare compound in your system. It's not commonly known, let alone accessible. We're looking into how it might have been administered. The implications were clear. This was no random act or simple allergic reaction. Someone with knowledge, resources, and a specific intent had targeted me." As Detective Chen stood to leave, promising to keep me updated, I was struck by a chilling thought. If someone had gone to such lengths to harm me at a public dinner, what would stop them from trying again? The heart monitor beside me beeped a little faster as anxiety took hold. I was alive, yes, but I was also vulnerable. And until we uncovered the truth, I couldn't trust anyone. Not the doctors, not the police, maybe not even my own family. As night fell and the hospital quieted, I lay awake, my mind a whirlwind of questions and suspicions. The Prescott Empire, which had always been my source of strength and purpose, now felt like a target on my back. And somewhere out there was a mysterious savior, a man who had quite literally reached into my throat and pulled me back from the brink of death. I made a silent vow then, in the sterile quiet of my hospital room. I would find out who was behind this, no matter the cost. And when I did, they would learn what it truly meant to cross a Prescott. Little did I know, the path to the truth would lead me through a labyrinth of family secrets, corporate intrigue, and personal revelations that would shake the very foundation of everything I thought I knew. The next few days passed in a blur of medical tests, police interviews, and a parade of concerned visitors. My father, Theodore Prescott, arrived from his business trip in Europe, his commanding presence filling the small hospital room. "This is unacceptable," he thundered, pacing back and forth. "I want the best security money can buy. No one gets near Olivia without thorough vetting." I watched him from my bed, a mix of comfort and frustration washing over me. Even now, he was taking charge, making decisions without consulting me. It was a dynamic I'd grown accustomed to over the years, but one that suddenly felt stifling. "Dad," I interjected, my voice stronger now. "I appreciate the concern, but I need to understand what's happening. Who would want to do this?" Theodore's face softened as he turned to me. "Olive," he said, using the childhood nickname I hadn't heard in years. "In our position, we always have enemies, but I promise you, I will get to the bottom of this." As he spoke, I couldn't help but notice the subtle tremor in his hand as he reached for his phone. It was a detail I might have missed before, but my brush with death had sharpened my senses, made me acutely aware of the nuances in people's behavior. "What about the board meeting?" I asked, dreading the answer. Surely they can't move forward without me. A shadow crossed my father's face. "The board has decided to postpone any decisions until you're fully recovered. Alexander will be stepping in temporarily to assist me." The news hit me like a physical blow. Everything I'd worked for, all the years of preparation, suddenly felt like they were slipping away. And Alex, of all people, stepping into my role, the same Alex who could barely make it to a dinner on time. Before I could voice my objections, there was a knock at the door. Detective Chen entered, her expression grave. "Mr. Prescott, Ms. Prescott." She nodded to each of us. "I have an update on our investigation." My father moved to stand protectively by my bedside. "Go on," he said, his tone brusque. "We've identified the man who performed the emergency procedure," Chen began. "His name is Dr. James Hawthorne. He was once a respected physician, but he lost his license about 10 years ago due to personal issues." The name hit me like a bolt of lightning. Memories flooded back. A kind face, gentle hands checking my throat for swollen glands, a warm voice telling me stories to distract me from the sting of a vaccination. "Dr. Hawthorne," I whispered. "He was our family doctor when I was a child." My father's reaction was immediate and visceral. His face paled, and he gripped the edge of my bed so hard his knuckles turned white. "That's impossible," he stammered. "Hawthorne he's gone. He left the country years ago." Detective Chen's eyes narrowed at my father's reaction. "Mr. Prescott, if you have any information about Dr. Hawthorne's history with your family, it could be crucial to our investigation." Theodore Prescott, the man I'd always seen as an unshakable pillar of strength, seemed to age years in a matter of seconds. He sank into the chair beside my bed, running a hand over his face. "It's a long story," he began, his voice heavy with what I now recognized as guilt, one I'd hoped was buried in the past. As my father began to speak, I felt the foundations of my world begin to shift. The tale he wove was one of ambition, betrayal, and a decades-old secret that had the power to unravel everything I thought I knew about my family and our company. Dr. James Hawthorne, it turned out, had been more than just our family physician. He had been my father's closest friend and a brilliant researcher. Together, they had been on the verge of a breakthrough that would have revolutionized the treatment of rare genetic disorders. We were young, ambitious, my father explained, his eyes distant with memory. We thought we could change the world, but their partnership had fractured over ethical disagreements. Hawthorne had wanted to slow down, to run more tests before moving to human trials. My father, driven by the potential for both scientific acclaim and financial success, had pushed forward. The results were not what we expected, Theodore continued, his voice barely above a whisper. There were side effects we hadn't anticipated. People got hurt. I listened in stunned silence as my father detailed how he had used his connections and the growing influence of Prescott Pharmaceuticals to bury the failed trials. Dr. Hawthorne had fought against the cover-up, threatening to go public with the truth. "So you discredited him," I said, the pieces falling into place. "You destroyed his career to protect the company." My father nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I told myself it was for the greater good, that the potential of our work outweighed the setbacks. But James, he never saw it that way. Detective Chen, who had been taking notes throughout this revelation, spoke up. "Mr. Prescott, you understand that withholding this information could be seen as obstruction of justice?" Theodore straightened, a flash of the powerful CEO returning. "I'm aware, Detective, but I assure you, this ancient history has nothing to do with what happened to Olivia." But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. And in that moment, a terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. "Dad," I said slowly, "the compound they found in my system, could it be related to your work with Dr. Hawthorne?" The look of horror that crossed my father's face was all the confirmation I needed. Whatever had nearly killed me was tied to the very foundations of Prescott Pharmaceuticals. As Detective Chen excused herself to make some calls, promising to return with more questions, I was left grappling with the implications of what I'd learned. The company I was set to inherit, the legacy I'd spent my life preparing for, was built on a lie. And now, That lie had nearly cost me my life, but there was something else nagging at me, a detail that didn't quite fit. If Dr. Hawthorne had saved my life, why would he have been involved in trying to harm me in the first place? And why, after all these years, had he suddenly reappeared? As night fell and the hospital settled into its quiet rhythms, I lay awake, my mind racing. The world I thought I knew had been turned upside down, and I was left with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my own family. In the darkness of my hospital room, I made a decision. As soon as I was released, I would find Dr. James Hawthorne. He was the key to unraveling this mystery, and perhaps to understanding my own past. Little did I know, this decision would set me on a path that would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and the true cost of ambition. The day of my hospital release arrived with a mix of relief and trepidation. As I packed the few belongings I had accumulated during my stay, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping out of one confined space, only to enter another, larger prison of secrets and lies. Alex arrived to drive me home, his usual carefree demeanor replaced by a nervous energy that set me on edge. "You ready to blow this popsicle stand?" he asked, attempting his trademark grin but failing to hide the worry in his eyes. I nodded, grateful for his presence despite the lingering questions I had about his involvement in recent events. As we made our way through the hospital corridors, I couldn't help but notice the increased security presence. My father's influence, no doubt. The drive home was filled with an uncomfortable silence, broken only by Alex's occasional attempts at small talk. I responded with monosyllabic answers, my mind preoccupied with planning my next moves. As we pulled up to my penthouse building, Alex cleared his throat. "Listen, Leave," he began, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "I know things are crazy right now, but I want you to know I'm here for you, whatever you need." I studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, I softened slightly. "Thanks, Alex. I appreciate that." Once inside my apartment, I was struck by how foreign it felt. The luxurious space that had once been my sanctuary now seemed cold and impersonal. Every surface held the potential for hidden cameras or listening devices. Paranoia, it seemed, was my new constant companion. I spent the next few days ostensibly resting and recovering, but in reality, I was piecing together a plan. My laptop became my lifeline to the outside world as I delved into research, carefully covering my tracks with each search. And Dr. James Hawthorne had effectively disappeared after losing his medical license. No social media presence, no public records beyond a decade ago. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. But I knew better. A man doesn't save someone's life and then simply fade away. He was out there, and I was determined to find him. My investigation was interrupted by a video call from my father. His face filled the screen, lines of worry etched deeper than I remembered. "Olivia, how are you feeling?" he asked, his tone a mixture of concern and something else I couldn't quite place. "I'm fine, Dad," I replied, careful to keep my voice neutral. "Getting stronger every day." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. Listen, I've been thinking. Perhaps it's best really if you focus on your recovery. The company can wait." I felt a flare of anger at his words. After years of grooming me to take over, he was now suggesting I step back. "And let Alex continue in my place?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. My father's expression tightened. "It's temporary, Olive. Just until we get to the bottom of this situation." I forced a smile. "Of course, Dad. Whatever you think is best." As soon as the call ended, I threw myself back into my research with renewed vigor. I wasn't about to be sidelined, not when I was so close to uncovering the truth. It was late into the night when I finally caught a break. An obscure medical forum post from 3 years ago mentioned a free clinic in a rundown part of the city. The description of one of the volunteer doctors matched Dr. Hawthorne perfectly. Heart racing, I knew I had to act fast. If I told anyone of my discovery, I risked the information getting back to those who might want to keep Dr. Hawthorne silent. No, this was something I had to do alone. The next morning, I dressed in the most nondescript clothes I owned and called a rideshare service instead of my usual driver. As I made my way across the city, I couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement mixed with fear. For the first time in my life, I was truly off script, acting on my own instincts rather than following a predetermined path. The clinic was housed in a weathered building that had seen better days. Graffiti adorned the walls, and the waiting room was filled with people from all walks of life, united by their need for care they couldn't afford elsewhere. I approached the receptionist, an older woman with kind eyes and a harried expression. "I'm looking for Dr. Hawthorne," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Dr. Hawthorne? He's not here today. Are you a patient of his?" I hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. "He saved my life recently. I need to thank him." The receptionist's expression softened. "He's always doing things like that. Look, I can't give out personal information, but he usually volunteers on Thursdays." I thanked her and turned to leave, my mind already racing with plans to return. But as I pushed open the clinic door, I found my path blocked by a familiar face. "Hello, Olivia," said Detective Chen, her expression a mix of concern and disappointment. "I think it's time we had a real conversation." My heart sank as I realized I'd been followed. But before I could respond, a commotion broke out in the waiting room behind me. I turned to see a man collapse, clutching his chest. Without thinking, I rushed to his side, my first aid training kicking in. As I checked his pulse and called for someone to dial 911, I caught sight of a figure emerging from the back of the clinic. Gray hair, beard, those intense eyes I remembered from the restaurant. Dr. James Hawthorne had appeared, as if summoned by the emergency. Our eyes met across the room, and in that moment, I saw recognition flash across his face, followed quickly by fear. But there was no time for confrontations or explanations. As we worked together to stabilize the patient, I was struck by the efficiency of Hawthorne's movements, the quiet authority in his voice as he directed the impromptu medical team. It wasn't until the ambulance had taken the patient away that I realized Detective Chen had been watching the entire scene unfold, her sharp eyes missing nothing. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, I found myself standing between Detective Chen and Dr. Hawthorne, the air thick with unasked questions and unspoken accusations. Dr. Hawthorne broke the silence first. "I suppose," he said, his voice gravelly with age and emotion. "We have a lot to talk about." Detective Chen nodded, her hand resting casually near her weapon. "I'd say that's an understatement, Doctor. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." As we moved towards a small consultation room, I caught sight of my reflection in a grimy window. The woman staring back at me looked nothing like the polished heiress who had entered the Golden Pearl just days ago. This woman had determination in her eyes and a set to her jaw that spoke of newfound resolve. I realized then that there was no going back. Whatever truths lay behind that door, whatever revelations awaited me, I was committed to seeing this through to the end. The Prescott legacy, my family's secrets, my own identity, everything was about to be laid bare. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the room, ready to face whatever came next. Little did I know, the conversation that followed would shake the very foundations of everything I thought I knew about myself and my family's empire. The consultation room felt claustrophobic as Detective Chen closed the door behind us. Dr. Hawthorne sank into a worn office chair, his eyes darting between Chen and me. The weight of unspoken truths hung heavy in the air. "Well," Detective Chen began, her tone deceptively casual, "I think it's time we all laid our cards on the table, don't you?" I nodded, my throat dry. "Dr. Hawthorne," I said, turning to the man who had saved my life twice now. "I need to understand. Why did you disappear all those years ago? And why come back now?" Hawthorne's weathered face creased with a sad smile. "My dear, I never truly left. I've been watching, waiting, trying to right the wrongs of the past." He leaned forward, his intense gaze locking with mine. "Olivia, what do you know about Project Prometheus?" The name sent a chill down my spine, though I couldn't say why. I've never heard of it," I admitted. Hawthorne nodded, unsurprised. "Of course not. Your father made sure of that. Project Prometheus was the crown jewel of Prescott Pharmaceuticals' research division 20 years ago, a revolutionary gene therapy that promised to cure a range of genetic disorders." As he spoke, fragmented memories began to surface, hushed conversations overheard as a child, tension in my father's voice when he spoke of past research. But something went wrong, I guessed, the pieces starting to fall into place. Wrong doesn't begin to cover it, Hawthorne said, his voice heavy with regret. The therapy had unforeseen side effects. Patients began experiencing severe autoimmune responses. Some didn't survive the trials. Detective Chen, who had been silently taking notes, interjected. And let me guess, Prescott Pharmaceuticals covered it all up. Hawthorne nodded grimly. Theodore was convinced we could fix it, that the potential benefits outweighed the risks. But I couldn't be part of it anymore. I threatened to go public. So my father discredited you, I finished, feeling sick to my stomach. He did more than that, Hawthorne said, a flash of anger in his eyes. He buried the research, silenced the affected families with massive payouts and ironclad NDAs. But worst of all, he continued the research in secret. I shook my head in disbelief. No, that's impossible. I would have known. Hawthorne's expression softened. Would you? Olivia, have you ever wondered why you have such severe allergies? Why you've always been more susceptible to illness than your brother? The implication of his words hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying I was part of the trials? Not exactly, Hawthorne said, his voice gentle. You were born after the official trials ended, but your father, he was obsessed with perfecting the therapy. He saw you as the perfect test subject, his own daughter, under his constant supervision. The room spun around me as the full weight of this revelation settled in. My entire life, the constant medical checkups, the strict diet, the carefully controlled environment, it had all been part of an ongoing experiment. Detective Chen's voice cut through my shocked haze. Dr. Hawthorne, you realize these are serious accusations. Do you have proof? Hawthorne nodded, reaching into his worn doctor's bag. He pulled out a battered laptop. I've spent years gathering evidence, tracking the long-term effects on the original trial participants, and I've been monitoring Olivia's condition from afar. As he pulled up files and charts on the screen, I saw my entire medical history laid bare. But there were other files too, clinical data on dozens of individuals, all showing similar patterns of autoimmune irregularities. The compound found in your system at the restaurant, Hawthorne explained. It was a triggered autoimmune response. Someone knew about your condition and exploited it. But who? I asked, my mind reeling. And why now? Hawthorne's expression darkened. I have my suspicions. There's been chatter in certain scientific circles about a breakthrough in gene therapy. I believe Prescott Pharmaceuticals is preparing to relaunch Project Prometheus under a new name. Detective Chen, who had been furiously taking notes, looked up sharply. And you think someone is trying to stop it by targeting Olivia? Or push it forward, I said, a horrible realization dawning. What better way to prove the therapy's effectiveness than to cure the CEO's daughter of a life-threatening condition? The implications were staggering. My near-death experience, the mysterious savior, the sudden push to sideline me from the company. It all pointed to a conspiracy far larger than I had imagined. We need to move carefully, Detective Chen said, her professional demeanor belied by the concern in her eyes. These are powerful people we're dealing with. I stood up, a new resolve settling over me. No more hiding, no more secrets. It's time to confront my father and put an end to this madness. Hawthorne reached out, grasping my hand. Olivia, you need to understand the risks. Your father, the board, they won't give up easily. And your own health. I squeezed his hand, feeling a connection to this man who had dedicated his life to protecting me from afar. I know the risks, but I also know that I can't live with this truth and do nothing. As we prepared to leave the clinic, each of us lost in thought about the challenges ahead. My phone buzzed with a message. It was from Alex. Emergency board meeting called. Dad's making some big announcement. Where are you? I showed the message to Detective Chen and Dr. Hawthorne. Looks like we're out of time, I said, a mix of fear and determination coursing through me. I'm coming with you, Hawthorne said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Detective Chen nodded. I'll need to call this in, get some backup. Whatever happens next, it's going to be big. As we rushed out of the clinic and into the bustling city streets, I felt as though I was seeing the world through new eyes. The gleaming skyscrapers that housed Prescott Pharmaceuticals' empire now seemed like monuments to secrets and lies. But amidst the turmoil and uncertainty, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in my life, I was charting my own course, driven not by the expectations placed upon me, but by a deep-seated need for truth and justice. As we sped towards the Prescott building, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. The carefully constructed world of my past was crumbling, but from its ruins, I was determined to build something new, something honest, ethical, and truly worthy of the power we wielded. Little did I know, the revelations of the past hour were just the beginning. The true test of my resolve, and the final unraveling of the Prescott legacy, awaited me in the boardroom above the city. The elevator ride to the top floor of Prescott Tower felt like an eternity. Dr. Hawthorne stood beside me, a reassuring presence in the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Detective Chen had split off to coordinate with her team, promising to be nearby if things escalated. As the doors slid open, revealing the opulent reception area of the executive floor, I took a deep breath. This was it. There was no turning back now. Alex was waiting for us, his eyes widening at the sight of Dr. Hawthorne. "Liv, what's going on? Who's this?" I placed a hand on his arm, noting the slight tremor that ran through him. "Alex, I need you to trust me. Everything's about to change." Before he could respond, the boardroom doors burst open, and my father strode out, flanked by several board members. His commanding presence filled the space, but as his eyes locked onto Dr. Hawthorne, I saw something I'd never witnessed before in Theodore Prescott: fear. "James," my father said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Doctor." Hawthorne stepped forward, his posture straight, despite the years that weighed on him. "Hello, Theodore. It's time we finished what we started all those years ago." The tension in the air was palpable. Board members whispered among themselves, confusion and concern evident on their faces. I cleared my throat, drawing all eyes to me. "I think we all need to talk. Now." My father's jaw clenched, but he nodded, gesturing towards the boardroom. As we filed in, I caught sight of familiar faces, board members I'd known since childhood, executives who had watched me grow up. But now, seeing them through the lens of what I'd learned, I wondered how many of them knew the truth about Project Prometheus. As everyone settled into their seats, an uncomfortable silence descended upon the room. I remained standing, feeling the weight of all those eyes upon me. "I know about Project Prometheus," I began, my voice stronger than I felt. "I know about the failed trials, the cover-up, and the ongoing experiments." Gasps and murmurs erupted around the table. My father's face had gone pale, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. "Olivia," he said, his tone a mixture of anger and pleading, "you don't understand. Everything I've done for the greater good." "The greater good?" Dr. Hawthorne interjected, his voice sharp. "Tell that to the families of those who died in the trials, Theodore. Tell that to your daughter, whom you've been experimenting on her entire life." The room erupted into chaos. Board members shouted questions, demands for explanations overlapping in a cacophony of confusion and outrage. "Enough!" My voice cut through the noise, silencing the room. "We're going to lay everything out, right here, right now. No more secrets, no more lies." Over the next hour, with Dr. Hawthorne's help, I outlined the full history of Project Prometheus. The initial promise, the devastating failures, the cover-up, and the clandestine continuation of the research. With each revelation, I watched the faces around the table shift from disbelief to horror to anger. "But why continue?" one board member asked, her voice shaking. "After all the damage it caused?" My father, who had remained silent throughout most of the explanation, finally spoke. "Because we were close," he said, his voice hoarse. "So close to a breakthrough that could change the world. Yes, there were setbacks, but the potential, I cut in, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Is that what I was to you? A potential breakthrough?" The hurt in my father's eyes was genuine, but it did little to quell the anger burning inside me. "Olive, no. You have to understand. I thought I could protect you, give you a better life while advancing the research. Everything I've done has been to secure your future, to leave you a legacy that would change the world. A legacy built on lies and suffering, Dr. Hawthorne said softly. Theodore, it has to stop. Now, as the weight of the revelation settled over the room, I saw the shift in the board members' faces. The shock was giving way to determination. They knew, as I did, that we were at a crossroads. We need to go public, I said, my decision made. Full disclosure, a complete halt to all related research, and reparations to the affected families. That will destroy the company, one of the older board members protested. Everything we've built will be worth nothing if it's built on a foundation of deceit, I finished for him. We have a chance to make this right, to redefine what Prescott Pharmaceuticals stands for. As debate erupted around the table, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Alex, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Liv, he said quietly, there's something you need to know about the night at the restaurant. But before he could continue, the boardroom doors burst open. Detective Chen strode in, flanked by several officers. Theodore Prescott, she announced, her voice ringing with authority. You're under arrest for fraud, medical malpractice, and endangerment. The room descended into chaos once more. As the officers moved towards my father, I saw a myriad of emotions flash across his face. Defeat, regret, and finally a glimmer of pride as his eyes met mine. Olivia, he said as they led him away. I'm sorry for everything, but know this, you are stronger than I ever was. You'll make this right. I believe in you. As the doors closed behind him, I found myself at the head of the table. All eyes turned to me. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, heavier than ever before. Ms. Prescott, one of the board members said, her voice tentative. What do we do now? I took a deep breath, looking around at the faces that now looked to me for leadership. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with challenges and potential pitfalls. But for the first time, I felt ready to face it head-on. Now, I said, my voice steady, we begin again. With truth, transparency, and a commitment to genuine progress, no matter the cost. As nods of agreement rippled around the table, I caught Dr. Hawthorne's eye. He gave me a small smile, a mixture of pride and sadness in his gaze. This was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey, but I knew that with allies like him by my side, we had a chance to turn this crisis into an opportunity for real change. The Prescott legacy was being rewritten, and this time, I would make sure it was a story worth telling. The days following my father's arrest were a whirlwind of activity. Press conferences, emergency board meetings, and endless negotiations with regulatory bodies consumed every waking moment. The world watched as Prescott Pharmaceuticals, once a bastion of medical innovation, teetered on the brink of collapse. I stood at the window of my my office now, looking out over the city. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, heavier than ever before. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Come in, I called, turning to see Alex enter, his usual carefree demeanor replaced by a seriousness that still felt foreign on him. Hey sis, he said, closing the door behind him. Got a minute? There's something I need to tell you. I nodded, gesturing to the chairs. As we sat, I noticed the dark circles under Alex's eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. Whatever he had to say, it was clearly eating at him. It's about the night at the restaurant, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I was involved. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I felt my body tense, bracing for what was to come. Alex continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. I didn't know they were going to hurt you, I swear. They told me it was just to make you sick, to delay the CEO announcement. I never thought... Who, Alex? I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Who put you up to this? He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. Jensen Holdings. They've been trying to gain control of Prescott for years. They approached me, said they could guarantee me a place on the board if I helped them. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Jensen Holdings, one of our biggest competitors, always nipping at our heels, and my own brother had been their pawn. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, struggling to keep my emotions in check. Alex ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache for simpler times. Because I can't live with the guilt anymore, and because I want to make it right. As anger and betrayal warred within me, I was struck by the realization that this moment of truth between us was the first step towards the transparency I had promised to bring to the company. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Here's what we're going to do." Over the next hour, Alex and I formulated a plan. We would go to the authorities with what we knew about Jensen Holdings' involvement, potentially uncovering a conspiracy that went far beyond Prescott Pharmaceuticals. It was a risky move, one that could further damage our already fragile company, but it was the right thing to do. As Alex left, looking both relieved and terrified, I called Dr. Hawthorne. His steady voice on the other end of the line was a comfort I didn't realize I needed. "James," I said, using his first name for the first time, "I need your help. We're going to reopen all the Project Prometheus files. Every test, every trial, every subject. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. Are you sure about this, Olivia?" he asked, concern evident in his tone. "Opening those files could have serious implications for your health, not to mention the legal ramifications." "I'm sure," I replied, my resolve strengthening with each word. "We can't move forward until we fully reckon with our past. And I need to know the truth about my own condition." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. As we dug deeper into the Project Prometheus files, a complex web of deceit and scientific ambition unfolded before us. The true scope of the project was staggering. It had tentacles reaching into every aspect of the company's research division. But amidst the darkness, we found glimmers of hope. Some of the research, when stripped of its ethical violations and hidden agendas, showed genuine promise. With Dr. Hawthorne's guidance, we began to identify aspects of the project that could be ethically pursued, potentially leading to breakthroughs in genetic medicine. As for my own condition, the truth was both terrifying and liberating. The treatments I had undergone throughout my life had indeed been part of my father's ongoing experiments, but they had also, inadvertently, given me a unique genetic profile, one that could hold the key to unlocking new treatments for a range of autoimmune disorders. "You're a bridge, Olivia," Dr. Hawthorne explained one evening as we pored over my medical files. "A living link between the failures of the past and the potential of the future." The implications were staggering. My body, the very thing that had made me feel vulnerable and different all my life, could now be the source of hope for countless others. As we worked to rebuild Prescott Pharmaceuticals from the ground up, I found myself drawing strength from unexpected sources. The board members who had chosen to stay, committed to our new vision of ethical research and transparency. The employees who worked tirelessly, believing in the possibility of redemption. And, surprisingly, the public, who responded to our honesty with cautious support. But the road ahead was far from smooth. Jensen Holdings, backed into a corner by our revelations, launched an aggressive campaign to discredit us. Legal battles loomed on the horizon, threatening to drain our already strained resources. In the midst of this storm, I found an unlikely ally in Detective Chen. Her investigation had expanded far beyond my father's actions, uncovering a network of corporate espionage and ethical violations that spanned the entire pharmaceutical industry. "You've opened Pandora's box, Ms. Prescott," she told me during one of our many late-night strategy sessions. "But sometimes, that's the only way to effect real change." As the months passed, small victories began to accumulate. We successfully negotiated settlements with many of the families affected by the original Project Prometheus trials. Our new research initiatives, built on a foundation of rigorous ethical oversight, began to show promise. And slowly, the tarnished Prescott name began to regain some of its luster. But perhaps the most significant change was within myself. The naive heiress who had walked into the Golden Pearl that fateful night was gone. In her place stood a leader tempered by adversity, committed to a vision of scientific progress that valued human life above all else. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my office watching the sun set over the city, I felt a presence beside me. It was Dr. Hawthorne, his weathered face etched with a mixture of pride and contemplation. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "when I saved your life that night, I never imagined it would lead to all this." I turned to him, feeling a rush of gratitude for this man who had become a mentor and friend. "Do you regret it?" I asked. He shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. Not for a moment. You've taken the mistakes of the past and turned them into hope for the future. That's no small feat, Olivia. As we stood there, watching the city lights flicker to life, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead was still long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time since this all began, I felt truly ready to face whatever came next. The Prescott legacy was being rewritten, one ethical decision at a time, and I was determined to ensure that this new chapter would be one of healing, progress, and unwavering integrity. 5 years had passed since the night that changed everything. I stood at the podium, looking out over a sea of faces: scientists, investors, media, and most importantly, patients and their families. The grand opening of the Prescott Center for Ethical Biomedical Research was more than just a corporate milestone. It was the culmination of a journey of redemption. As I began my speech, my eyes found familiar faces in the crowd. Dr. Hawthorne, now the head of our ethics board, gave me an encouraging nod. Detective Chen, who had become an unlikely friend and ally, stood at the back, her usual stern expression softened by a hint of pride. And Alex, who had worked tirelessly to redeem himself, sat with the board members, his face a mixture of anxiety and hope. 5 years ago, I began, my voice steady. Prescott Pharmaceuticals stood at a crossroads. We could have chosen to bury our past, to continue down a path of secrecy and unchecked ambition. Instead, we chose to confront our mistakes, to learn from them, and to forge a new way forward. The journey hadn't been easy. The legal battles had been fierce, draining our resources and testing our resolve. There were times when bankruptcy seemed inevitable, when the weight of our past threatened to crush any hope for the future. But we persevered. Today, I continued, we open the doors to a new era of medical research, one built on a foundation of transparency, ethical rigor, and a commitment to putting patients first. The Prescott Center will not just develop new treatments, it will set a new standard for how medical research is conducted. As I spoke, I couldn't help but reflect on the personal cost of this transformation. My father, serving his sentence, had become a shell of the man he once was. Our relationship, strained to the breaking point, was slowly mending through carefully monitored visits and brutally honest conversations. It was a painful reminder that progress often comes at a price. But this center is more than just a building or a research facility, I said, my voice growing passionate. It's a promise. A promise to every patient, every family member, every individual who has ever felt helpless in the face of illness. We promise to never lose sight of the human lives behind every data point, every clinical trial, every breakthrough. I paused, allowing my gaze to sweep across the room. And to ensure we keep this promise, we've established the Hawthorne Oversight Committee, named after the man who had the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it cost him everything. Dr. Hawthorne's eyes glistened with unshed tears as the crowd erupted in applause. His journey from disgraced physician to revered ethical guardian was a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of second chances. As the applause died down, I shifted to the core of my speech. Today, I'm proud to announce our first major initiative, the Phoenix Project. A murmur of interest rippled through the audience. This was the moment we'd been building towards for years. The Phoenix Project will pick up where Project Prometheus left off, but this time, we'll do it right. Using the ethically sourced data from volunteers, including myself, we aim to develop a revolutionary treatment for autoimmune disorders. But unlike before, every step of this process will be open to public scrutiny. We will publish all our data, all our methods in real time. The boldness of this move wasn't lost on anyone. In an industry known for its secrecy and patent wars, we were choosing radical transparency. We know this path is risky, I acknowledged. We know it opens us up to criticism, to competition. But we also believe it's the only way to regain the trust we lost, and to ensure that science serves humanity, not the other way around. As I concluded my speech, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The Prescott name, once synonymous with corporate greed and scientific hubris, was being reborn. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tours, interviews, and congratulations. It wasn't until late in the evening, as the last of the guests were leaving, that I found a moment of quiet. I stood in what would be my new office, looking out over the city. The Prescott Center, with its sleek lines and expansive laboratories, was a far cry from the imposing skyscraper that had once housed our operations. It was a physical manifestation of our transformation, open, transparent, integrated with the community around it. A soft knock at the door drew my attention. It was Alex, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "Thought you could use this," he said, offering me a glass. "Hell of a day, sis." I took the glass, clinking it gently against his. "Hell of a 5 years," I corrected with a small smile. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, sipping our champagne and looking out at the city lights. "Do you ever wonder," Alex began hesitantly, "what Dad would think of all this?" I considered the question carefully. My relationship with our father remained complicated, a tangle of love, resentment, and slowly healing wounds. "I think," I said slowly, "he'd be proud. Not of everything we've done, maybe, but of the fact that we faced our mistakes head-on and found a way to make something good out of them." Alex nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You know, when this all started, I thought it was the end. Of the company, of our family, of everything. I never imagined that we'd end up here." I finished for him. "Me neither. But that's the thing about rock bottom. The only way left to go is up." As we continued to chat, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead was still uncertain. The Phoenix Project was a gamble, one that could revolutionize medicine or end in failure. Our commitment to transparency would be tested time and again, and the shadows of our past would never fully disappear. But for the first time in years, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. We had taken a legacy built on secrets and lies, and transformed it into something hopeful, something true. As the night deepened and the city quieted, I found myself alone in the office. I pulled out a small, worn photo from my desk, a picture of my younger self with my father, both of us smiling, unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. "We did it, Dad," I whispered to the photo. "Not the way you imagined, maybe, but we're changing the world, and this time we're doing it right." I placed the photo back in the drawer and turned to leave. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight, but tonight, I allowed myself to savor this moment of triumph. As I walked out of the Prescott Center, I took one last look at the building, its lights shining like a beacon in the night. It stood as a testament to the idea that even the deepest wounds could heal, that redemption was possible, and that with courage and integrity, we could build a legacy worthy of the public's trust. The future, with all its uncertainties and possibilities, awaited, and I was ready to face it, armed with the lessons of the past and a renewed sense of purpose. The Prescott name would mean something different now. Not power or wealth, but hope. Hope for a future where science and ethics walked hand in hand, where transparency trumped secrecy, and where the pursuit of knowledge never came at the expense of human dignity. As I stepped into the cool night air, I smiled. This wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning, and the best was yet to come.